You're listening to Girls with Grafts, a burn community podcast created by Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors, a leading nonprofit dedicated to supporting the burn community. In this podcast, we'll talk with burn survivors, share resources to help with supporting and improving burn recovery, and discuss how to prevent burn injuries. Here are your hosts, burn survivors and Phoenix Society's marketing team, Amber Wilcox and Rachel Kudlak.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Girls with Grafts. I am Rachel Kudlak. I'm one of the hosts of the show, and today, unfortunately, I will not be joined by my lovely co-host, Amber Wilcox, but I have an amazing guest here joining me today. So without further ado, let me thank today's podcast sponsor so I can bring him on the screen. So today's podcast is powered by one of our fire prevention partners, Tello. Tello is committed to providing effective and innovative fire protection, life safety, and security programs. And you can learn more about them by visiting tello.com. So like I said, I have an awesome guest joining me on the podcast today. So today I am welcoming Dr. Kenny Tello. Dr. Tello serves as the Corporate Director of Team Member Wellbeing at Orlando Health, where he leads initiatives that empower team members and equip leaders to foster a culture of care and organizational transformation. With over 20 years of clinical experience and extensive research in industrial and organizational psychology and leadership, he is recognized as an expert in the mental health and human performance fields. Dr. Tello has been instrumental in developing nationally recognized programs and has consulted globally on critical incident protocols. And Dr. Tello continues to champion science-based strategies to help individuals and organizations thrive. So, Dr. Tello, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
You're very welcome, Rachel. I am excited. Thank you for having me.
Yes, well, I know I just read your bio, but we always love to start off the show just by having our guests tell us a little bit more about themselves and specifically for you, how you got yourself into your current role today.
Absolutely. And so it's quite an interesting story because I believe that many of us in the helping profession, we knew early on in life that we wanted to help people in whichever capacity. So for me, initially, I thought I wanted to be a priest because I grew up Catholic, and I thought, wow, I love what they do up on the stage and also just helping people. Then I realized that once I was going to go on seminary, actually, I realized that this aspect of celibacy, and I realized at that point I had a girlfriend and I want to be married and I want to have kids, etc. So then I started exploring different options, and one of those options was psychology. And so I went through college and did pretty much all of the things that I needed to do. And I loved every minute of just my clinical practice, just seeing individuals, couples, families from different walks of life and facing different challenges. But then there was also something inside of me that started pushing me to doing additional trainings and helping individuals, but also helping organizations, not just helping individuals in my office, but also helping organizations. And that's really when I met, I want to say Orlando Health as an institution. Also because in 2016, as probably you're aware, there was a pulse tragedy here in Orlando, and Orlando Health has a level 1 trauma about 3 blocks away from the club where the tragedy happened. And so they were really in the epicenter of that tragedy, also trying to figure out what else can we do to help our team members, our physicians, our leaders with their own well-being. And so at that point, it was really, for me, what an amazing opportunity that I was given to join other individuals and starting from scratch programs targeting physicians, leaders, and even our employees, which we call team members. And so fast forward, then I started working more in developing programs, developing services, resources, always with the thought of wanting to create the biggest impact for those individuals that are helping our patients. Because as ironic as it may sound, those in healthcare are the worst at caring for themselves. And not because of a neglect or anything else, it's because all of their training and everything about them, it's always focused on caring for others, caring for patients. And so they do it oftentimes at the expense of their own well-being. So I feel privileged that I get to run different programs that impacts, yes, the patients, their families, but also those individuals who care for those patients, who cares for those families. And so that's really now where I am is I get to be the I get to serve really individuals in that capacity as the director of all of these different programs that impact the
Mm.
of those people helping the patients.
No, I love that. That's, we do talk on this podcast a little bit about, obviously the importance of self-care, and
Mhm.
especially for the healthcare professionals and burn care professionals who, you know, especially with burn care, can be really heavy at times, and just really reiterates how important that self-care and truly caring for yourself is.
Mhm.
Um, so kind of before we kind of dive a little bit more into pet therapy, which is, I know it's today's topic, but
Mhm.
can you tell us a little bit more about, like, when you say you've been working on like protocols to help professionals take care of themselves, like what does that look like?
Sure. And so I developed protocols for three different I'll call it seasons of an individual. So the first season is preventative, is what can they do to make sure that they get the tools, the knowledge to feel empowered regarding their mental health, regarding their emotional health, physical health, financial health, and even their spiritual health. Is what trainings, what, like for instance, we develop master classes, we develop weekly tips, we develop different health assessments. So what resources are available for individuals who want to be proactive in terms of their own health, their own well-being? So that's one. Then other protocols is what do we need to do that are best practices for individuals in the midst of a loss, in the midst of anxiety, in the midst of depression, in the midst of losing patience, in the midst of challenging situations. What can we do in the midst of that for the caregivers, for nurses, physicians, etc.? What can we do? So develop several protocols as to what's helpful for those individuals. And then the after is more related to if something happened that was unexpected, there's overwhelming, that now we can call it a crisis. What can we do as an organization to make sure that these individuals heal properly, but also that they're able to bounce back in the best way possible? And so one of the protocols, which actually involves pet therapy. So pet therapy is involved in many of these protocols, but this one in particular, it's extremely relevant because after we call it a critical incident, after a critical incident, which sometimes involves the death of several patients, maybe back to back, or mass casualties, or different situations that, like I mentioned, as unexpected, overwhelming, and that is impacting their coping skills. It's usually the protocol involves 5 steps. The first step is the senior leader reaches out to me to let me know, to notify me this just happened. Then I triage and make a determination as to what would be the best response given the situation. When I respond, then I bring somebody from pet therapy. Bring pet therapy with me, and then I meet with the team during that team or during that meeting. Then I do a debriefing. The debriefing takes about 5-10 minutes because at that point I don't want to ask a lot of questions or open them up because I recognize A, they're working, or B, they're about to go home. And so at that moment, what I want to do is plant those seeds for individuals to recognize that some of the things that they're experiencing are actually usual and normal and to be expected, but also to connect them with resources. So my role, and based on that protocol, is to normalize the situation, to let them know what symptoms that they will likely expect to have, but also some red flags that if they do experience those, what will be the resources, provide some strategies. And then at that point, then I introduce pet therapy. And then because pet therapy will do the way that I always like to say is pet therapy touches the soul of individuals when I just get to touch the intellect. They do so much more than I'm never able to do. And so that gives our employees and those individuals involved in the debriefing an opportunity to almost reset, because at that moment they're able to be able to pet the dog, and even though on the surface it seems like, oh, they're just petting the dog, it's not, because A, it's a trained dog. B, it's a moment where maybe their adrenaline was pumping because of something maybe just happened, or they're really feeling overwhelmed. That at that moment, that interaction helps them regulate, and regulate at a physical level, not just at a mental and emotional level, but even at a physical level, because as they're interacting, they're touching the dog, they're petting the dog, they're in the presence of a dog. Now they're able to regulate much better than even talking to a counselor even at that moment. And so that facilitates their going back to work, or they're going home in a way that they can actually concentrate. They get back they get into the car without feeling completely overwhelmed. And so that's an example of one of the protocols. But circling back to your question, Rachel, is the different protocols call for different things, depending on, is it going to be more proactive, is it going to be during something happening to that employee or to that team, or is it right after an incident that is extremely overwhelming for them.
That thanks for sharing that. That's so interesting. And I know we're going to dive a lot more into pet therapy because, I think from the outside, a lot of, and maybe this is just some misconceptions around pet therapy. It's like kind of what you said of, oh, you see a dog and you're going to get happy. And I'm a dog lover. So any dog I see, I immediately get excited. But it's, that deeper, there's so much, more going that a survivor can, especially for a burn survivor, can benefit from pet therapy. So I would love to kind of dive a little bit more into that.
Sure.
I know, obviously, and our listeners know that a burn injury is much more than physical. It's that emotional, psychological recovery as well. So I know you touched on it a little bit, but can you dive a little bit more into those like emotional benefits that pet therapy can have?
Absolutely. And essentially, as you said, is when somebody experiences a burn, and therefore they have to be in recovery for that. One of the things that I'm reminded is that we see the physical scars in some cases, but it's the emotional, it's the mental scars, the ones that can be even harder to treat. Because when someone has experienced has experienced an event like that, and now they're burn survivors, even that becomes a different identity, because now I survived something. And yes, even though language is powerful and important, that's still almost like it becomes a reminder of something that happened to me, that now my life, or some aspects of my life, might be different. So individuals that are burn survivors, they're having to grieve different aspects of themselves that maybe are no longer there. It could be maybe how they looked. It could be things that they were able to do before, but now they can't. It could be now they have to be extra careful when they are outside, or these little things that now are different. That's a change. That's something that was not there before, and therefore people are having to grieve what once was, but now it's something different. Where pet therapy comes into play and is so helpful for individuals to recover and to work through that new life, essentially, is that when they have a dog, especially dogs that are specifically trained, so not just any dogs, because sometimes dogs can actually make it more difficult if you have a dog that is has a lot of energy, or that is not the most well-behaved dog. But I'm talking about a dog that is properly trained, that is more like pet therapy or service animals. Because at that point, a couple of things happen. Number one is you get to be social with another social animal. In this case, will be a dog. So that socialization is extremely healing for individuals, because everything about us from our mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, and even our physical health, everything about us craves connections. We're not
Mm-hmm.
meant to be alone. We're meant to be in a community. And so everything about us craves that sense of connecting with individuals. So a dog already facilitates this dynamic of you're connecting with a dog. You're connecting with a dog that is not judging you, doesn't see the scars, doesn't even know what just happened, or the changes. The dog just sees you as a source of that love and that connection. Another aspect of pet therapy that helps burn survivors specifically is sometimes it gives them a sense of purpose, because now you're responsible for a dog. You're
Yep.
responsible to feed the dog, play with the dog, etc. So it gives them a sense of purpose. uh, but also, in addition to the connection that I mentioned, is now, as burn survivors interact with the dog at a very, very primitive level, they're also being regulated constantly, because the dog, and again, that's why you need dogs that are properly trained. The dog is typically very calm. So
Mm-hmm.
think of it as almost like the energy, if you will, like the dog's energy is pretty calm and collected. And at times, burn survivors, especially if they're dealing with anxiety, if they're dealing with depression, or just simply the psychological trauma that can happen to individuals who have experienced that, it can be so calming just to be
Mm-hmm.
in the presence of a dog whose energy is differently, that if they have issues sleeping or concentrating, now you have a dog that now becomes almost like your life companion,
Mm-hmm.
now is able to help you along the way in that journey.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know this is a little bit different, but I started working from home in 2019, and I didn't have a dog at the time, and I went through definitely a shift, and obviously COVID happened as well, where being in isolation and being by yourself, and it is just incredible the difference, like, of my just day to day now that I have a dog with me at home all day versus being home alone by myself.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
those, like, that emotional attachment you do get to them. Speaking, like I said, I am a dog lover, but I'm sure, so many of our listeners can relate to that as well.
Of course, because in some cases, for those of us who are dog lovers, your dogs become like your children. uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so, and in many aspects, I know sometimes some people prefer dogs over like real human children. uh, and so, to your point, Rachel, when you have experienced that isolation, in our case because of the pandemic, but it could be because you work from home, maybe not because of the pandemic, it's just you just happen to have that role that gives you the flexibility to work from home. One of the things that I've noticed in individuals like that is, again, they create the connection. Even if they're introverts, because I know sometimes people say, well, what if I'm an introvert? Actually, I don't like people. And that's a misconception. Introverts, it's not that they don't like people, they're just very selective as to which people. And they typically just do one person at a time, but they still need connections. Actually, one of the red flags for any burn survivors or any survivors of any sort of trauma, it's isolation. When people begin to isolate, that is a huge red flag, because we're not meant to do that. Again, even those that are introverts that say, "Oh, I'd rather not be around people," is you eventually do. You do want to be around your best friend or your parent or or your significant other or a dog, because you're still needing that connection, because that is inherited in just being a human being.
Definitely. Well, when it comes to pet therapy, I know we've been talking a lot about dogs specifically, but are there other animals, or are there certain, I mean, maybe even dog breeds that I guess have like better benefits than other? I don't know. That might be a dumb question, but I'm just curious. Like I said, we often see dogs, but kind of what other animals are, or anything on that?
Of course, no, and that's not a dumb question. That's actually, I get that question a lot, because yes, I think people equate pet therapy with dogs, because most people, when they think of pets, they think of dogs. So the distinction between pet therapy and pets is the function. So anything really can be a pet. I mean, I know people have spiders as pets, or snakes as pets, or chickens. I mean, pets in and of themselves can be, I want to say anything, because I don't want to just say yes, anything can be a pet. But I mean, the human beings can be quite interesting at times. Pet therapy is will be based on the function of it, and it has that word therapy, meaning being able to help with the psyche, help with the emotional aspect of the individual. So in that case, like, I wouldn't consider a spider a good pet therapy individual, or, well, I wouldn't say an individual, but a pet. Um,
Yep.
so there will be, I would say, a few requirements, if you will. Number one is you want a pet that can actually be trained to
Mm.
recognize the need, but also to know how to respond to the need. And so some dogs, sometimes even cats, for instance, I know some individuals might say, okay, pet therapy can be a cat, but it's harder to train a cat. I know, for instance, horses, dolphins, they can function as a pet therapy, if you will, because especially dolphins, they're social animals. They live in packs, actually. And so it's all about the pet's ability to recognize the emotional needs of its owner and know how to respond. So that if a dog notices, for instance, we have several dogs that they can walk into a room and they know who to go to based on what they're sensing, what they're smelling, and what they're seeing, because they are trained as pet therapy dogs, that they're able to recognize a just a regular dog. Wouldn't We would consider them quote unquote pet therapy, because maybe the person feels like, oh, have a dog is great, but in the true sense of the word, they will actually need to be trained, so that they can provide that emotional
Hmm.
support. As far as breed, um, I mean, there's several dogs. I mean, I know sometimes people say, well, maybe Chihuahuas wouldn't, because they're real small, they bark a lot, they shake, that maybe they need their own pet therapy. But honestly, I've seen some Chihuahuas that are amazing companions,
Mm.
and we have a few Chihuahuas in our program that they're amazing. So people might
Mm.
say, okay, big dogs, Rottweilers, pit bulls, etc. Maybe they're not because of the stereotypes, but I've seen some of those that are super protective, amazing with kids. They're like gentle giants. So as
Hmm.
far as breed, I wouldn't feel comfortable saying this will be a
Yeah.
good breed, this will not, because I've seen the exceptions. However, I've seen like types of dogs like the Labrador, for instance, German Shepherds. I've seen those as well, to where I th- it falls more into people's preference, because some people might prefer a dog that doesn't shed a lot of hair
Yeah.
but salivates, or some individuals say, yeah, but I live in an apartment, so maybe a smaller dog. So in terms of breed, if those listening to us, some questions that they really need to ask themselves is not so much would this be a good pet therapy dog, but it's more about, is this a dog good for my lifestyle, for where I live, for who I bring around if I have other dogs, um, for how much time I'm going to be spending on training the dog. It's more of the logistical pieces that I believe makes a good pet therapy dog, other
Mm.
than the actual breed. Because
Yeah.
there's some breeds that you might think, oh, they are like golden retrievers, oh, they're great dogs to train. And I know many stories and many individuals who have golden retrievers that, for all they know, they have like greyhound blood, run
So,
around a lot. And so, as far as the breed, is honestly primarily on whether or not it will be a good fit between a handler and a dog. And so, it's always good to again ask yourself that question: is this dog good for my lifestyle, from the place where I live, as well as my own expectations, because that is
Mm.
something that we do evaluations, because we want to make sure that when we bring in a pet therapy team, and it's a team because the dog is a handler, when we bring on pet therapy teams, it's interesting because let's say of 10 that apply, let's say once a month, we somewhat can predict that maybe about 30-40% of those, like 3 or 4 out of those 10, will make it through.
Mm.
um, but what was challenging, and this is in reference to what I've been saying, is all these 10 handlers, owners, they're coming in saying, my dog will be an amazing pet therapy dog because my dog loves kids. My dog is great.
Yeah.
And then in the evaluation, they cannot even get their dog to sit down. Or like if we drop something, because that's one of the test, is they cannot pick it up, because if they're going to come into the
Mm.
hospital, if something drops on the floor, the dog cannot go and pick it up. And so it's fascinating when we get to have these conversations after the fact, and we let them know, you know what, your dog is almost ready, or at times we have to let them know is your dog, it's not going to be a good fit to be a pet therapy dog in our facilities or in the capacity that we need them, because of A, B, and C. Maybe
Mm.
your dog can visit a park, or do something more on the outside, but internally they get overwhelmed because of the sounds, or they don't want to get in the elevator without panicking. So there's so many elements that when we start looking at pet therapy as a whole, and I guess it's almost like a rabbit hole,
Mhm.
uh, that really what's most important rather than the breed is the handler, and whether or not their lifestyle is able to support that. Because one of the shows that I used to watch back in the day, it was Caesar 911, or the Dog Whisperer. I think that was his first show, and it was
Yeah.
a dog trainer that would come in and work with dogs with problems, typically with anxiety or aggression. But the tagline that he used in almost every single episode is that he rehabilitated dogs, but he trained handlers. And he always said, most of the time, the problem is not the dog, is the handler.
Mhm.
And we see that even in pet therapy, is some dogs can be amazing pet therapy dogs. Sometimes the handlers are too much, or they're pushing them to do something
Mm.
they're not comfortable with. And so that's why those that are considering adopting a dog or getting a dog, and then potentially wanting to move into a pet therapy sort of volunteer opportunity, is always keep that in the back of their minds, because it is important.
For sure. That's such a good point. And it's funny too, because I was thinking about like my dog. I'm like, oh, he would be amazing. He could provide so much love to, other people. And then I'm like, oh yeah, but then like a loud noise would happen and he would get scared and run away. And then I'd be like, you failed.
Right. And so, what kind of dog do you have, Rachel?
He's a German Shepherd mix, so he is a gentle giant, but he's a big baby.
Um, yes, and to your point, sometimes you're thinking, oh, they'll be great, until you start thinking about what it actually entails to be a
Yep.
pet therapy dog or pet therapy team. Now, every institution or every industry has different standards. So some pet therapy dogs might be good with, let's say, burn survivors, but
Mm.
may not be good with burn survivors who are on the spectrum, let's say, or they might be good with burn survivors who have depression, but now with those that have PTSD because of other situations they have gone
Mm.
in their lives. So now it's not black or white. That's really what I'm getting at. Is pet therapy and supportive animals. They're more in the gray area. That there's so many elements that is always helpful to consider all of those.
No, that's a great point. Um, so when you are bringing in pets for a pet therapy at the hospital, for instance, how do you, I guess, how does that work? I've never had, or have seen a pet therapy session or a visitation. Like, do you pair up certain patients with certain dogs? Do you, schedule that all ahead of time? Do you just bring in the pets and kind of see who gravitates toward which one, or how does that work exactly?
Of course, and that's a great question. And so, of course, we do everything that we can to evaluate the dogs, so that we're bringing in teams that we know they're going to be good for specific situations. So we try to bring teams that will be, we'll say, generalist, like they could visit different types of patients, different hospitals, maybe events, etc. However, there are times when some dogs may just be good for, let's say, an event where people come to them, but they're not necessarily visiting because of the noises, etc. Um, and so now, along with this is the handler. Some handlers are saying, I want to volunteer as a pet therapy, but I only want to visit kids, or I only want to visit burn survivors because I am one, or I just want to visit cancer patients because my mom died of cancer and this is a legacy or something that I want to do to get back. And so the handlers also have a saying as to where and how we use them based on their, almost like their calling in life. But after the evaluation, what we do is then we do shadows. We shadow them in different scenarios, and just we match them with either the type of patients or the type of units or the type of situations that they want to be involved in. And so we shadow them, because one thing is to do an evaluation in a simulated situation. Something else is once they're actually in it. So we shadow them, and then once they graduate, then we onboard them. They get a badge. They get pretty much essentially credentialing to be able to visit our sites. And then at that point, what we do is whenever one of our nurses or leaders, they make a request, what we do is then those requests, we post them on a site where all of our volunteers have access. And then they get to see every single day what's being requested. And then the volunteers have the freedom to select, okay, I want to visit this unit. I want to actually visit this child or this individual or this event. And then they go show up, they participate in that. Of course, they'll let us know that they have participated, because we keep track of that as well. And then every single day, then it's the cycle begins again. Is here's what happens or what's been requested. At times, some of the volunteers, they've committed to every Wednesday or every Thursday, I'm gonna go and visit. So what they do is they come in, and then they log in, and then they are able to see all of the requests that happen at that hospital or in that unit. And then they go and then they visit. Something important that is sometimes people don't realize is dogs also have feelings, and they can actually burn out. They can have compassion fatigue, because they go in, and think about it like this: is every time they go in, they give a piece of themselves to everybody else. And so because of that, our pet therapy dogs work, we call it work, 2 hours at a time. After those 2 hours, then the handlers know, okay, go take them to a dog park so that they can socialize with other dogs, again, that connection with other dogs. Or maybe after 2 hours, you're good to go, because we don't want to add or make it too burdensome on the handler, but also on the dog, because the dog is able to pick up on the emotional needs, but is also giving of themselves to others. But that's how we typically handle the different requests, because we have requests either for specific patients or specific floors or for specific events, like the holidays are coming. And so we may have like time with Santa. And so we might go and also have pet therapy as children's hospitals. Those children that are admitted into the hospitals and they're not able to go home, but they can take a picture with Santa, but also they get to play and pet the dog. And so we always do the best that we can to match the request with the team, so that it's a lot more fulfilling for everybody.
Yeah. And that kind of sparked another question of, for example, let's say a hospital is running a support group for, survivors, whether they're still in care or they're just coming in for that support group. Is that a good opportunity to kind of introduce pet therapy of just having, a dog, or I don't know, maybe how many dogs can be together at once, but come to the support group and just be in the room with, the survivors? Or is that something that, you've done before?
Yeah, so that is something that we've done before, especially visiting different groups of individuals. The only caveat that I would add to that is whoever is making the request for the peer support, I would ask everybody in the peer support if they're comfortable with dogs as well, because some individuals are afraid of dogs.
Yep.
And so, even though it's a pet therapy dog, well behaved, some individuals fear can be too much. And so, you never want to assume that, oh, it's a great thing that I'll bring pet therapy to peer support, and then somebody all of a sudden walks out or feels extremely anxious that, oh my gosh, I was bitten by the same or a dog similar, and now they get triggered. Also, because of the associations, because possibly if a burn survivor, let's say their apartment caught on fire and their dog was in the apartment and died, now seeing another dog can actually bring up very intense emotions. And so those will be the only caveats that I would add. But if the peer, everybody in the peer support is good with it, it will be the perfect scenario. And I would encourage that, because you will see a transformation. Even the conversations will be even deeper, because now you have a dog that facilitates the emotional regulation of what's happening. So people tend to be much more open about their experiences, but also gives them an ability to reset. So in those cases, my recommendation will be either to do it at the beginning or preferably at the end. Because if you bring them in the middle, you just lost your attendees. They're going to be so preoccupied with the dog that, forget it.
If you know I would be.
Exactly, especially dog lovers, like, oh my gosh. And it's so funny. That's one of the aspects that I love about pet therapy, is when we walk in with a pet therapy team. Everybody just drops everything. It's like, oh my gosh. And they know that our dogs by name. Is like, here is so and so, and they're so excited. So in a peer support, especially if there's a topic or there's going to be a heavy discussion, I would encourage for people to do it at the end. So that's a way of resetting, and if their emotions still lingering because of the discussion, they're able to now be able, wouldn't say heal, but be able to process and begin to digest some of it before they go home. Or at the beginning, as an icebreaker, as a good way of just getting people comfortable, and then let's start with the meeting. But also, when I keep the dog for the entirety of the peer support, because then it will be distracting for anybody.
Yep, no, exactly. Well, I know I shared we obviously have, burn care professionals who listen to this podcast, and I'm sure some of them probably don't have either a pet therapy program at their hospital or at their center. So what are things that they should know if they maybe want to start their own, or, work with the hospital to get one up and running? What are, I guess, some key things that our professionals listening should know?
Of course. And so a few things is, you want a few roles already in place. And one of those roles will be what we will call the pet therapy coordinator. So this is the individual that they don't necessarily have to own a dog, but this is the individual that will take care of all the logistics, is onboarding the volunteers, the calendars, getting the request, figure out how people will make a request. Will they send an email? Will they fill out a Microsoft form, for instance? So all of the behind the scenes, you need someone who's going to own that process. And I always like to say that, because most individuals focus more on the, oh my gosh, there's dogs and everybody loves dogs, but no one wants to do the behind the scenes, which is 80% honestly of everything. Second is to begin to create partnerships with training facilities that specialize on dogs, either service dogs or pet therapy dogs, so that you already have those partnerships, because once you build the program, I mean, as they say, you build it and they will come. Volunteers are constantly looking for places that they can give back, either because of a cause or because of something personal. And so that won't be the recruitment part, may not be the biggest issue. But again, it's the coordination, building it from the
Mhm.
ground up, is looking at the logistics. So you need that role. You will also need someone who then can be able to shadow and evaluate the dog. So at that point, then is looking at the risk, looking at the legality of it, the liability. Once again, still doing these things, but more from pet therapy. So at that point, you do want someone who has been certified by different organizations, or that they have very specialized training in pet
Mm.
therapy that can understand the risk, the liabilities, and they can create a specific policy that is specific to that industry or to that hospital or to that school or whatever they want to create that. And then after that, then you want to begin the recruitment portion of it. And then in the recruiting is figuring out almost like the what we call it exclusionary criteria is, this is what we're looking for, but these are the dogs or the teams that unfortunately we'll have to say no. And
Mm.
then if we say no, what is the alternative? Are you going to refer them to training facilities? Are you going to offer those trainings yourselves? Is how are you going to handle these no's so that they can potentially be, instead of no's, not
Mm.
yet. But also, how do we know these are the aspects that we look for in a good pet therapy team? And so those will be the roles specifically that any organization or any institution wanting to begin their pet therapy program. I would start with these two roles that I mentioned: is someone who is good at coordinating, that loves
Mhm.
pet therapy and loves working with volunteers, because most pet therapy programs, they're ran by volunteers. I mean, and so it has its advantages, but also there are disadvantages, because these are individuals that can opt to say, no, I don't want to do that. They're volunteers. And
Yeah.
so you want someone with that knowledge, but also you want someone who has the proper certifications to be able to speak with credibility and authority on pet therapy as a program.
No, that's so helpful to know. And like I said, I'm sure we'll have some folks who are listening to this and definitely want to incorporate pet therapy at their hospital. So,
Mhm.
I know we obviously have been talking a lot about survivors, and we talked a little bit at the beginning about this, but can you also talk about how pet therapy can help specifically the healthcare professionals, the workers at the hospital, the folks who are, giving so much to patients, and what benefits that they can experience?
Of course. And so, of course, the one of the benefits that we've been talking about is the physical benefit, is for them to be able to regulate, especially after an incident, but also ongoing as they recover. Physically speaking, mentally speaking, it can be something that people can lean on.
Mm.
And sometimes it gives them that sense of purpose. And to an extent, I know we were talking about sometimes dogs can be like our children. And so I know sometimes parents can say, oh my gosh, if it wasn't because I'm a parent, I'm not sure I could wake up in the morning or do what I need to do, but my kids need me. So sometimes a dog can function as that. And so also another benefit of, besides regulation, besides people giving them almost like a sense of purpose, is also the socialization, but also being able to give back. Uh, if you were to ask any of our volunteers why they do what they do, sometimes they give you this look like, I don't understand the question. Because in, like, from our perspective, like, I'm so grateful to each one of
Yeah.
them that they're giving back. Some of them are retired individuals, some of them they have a job, but then this is something that they actually love to do. So if I were to ask them in a half, it's like, okay, what is the reason you do this? um, you'll get an answer along the lines of, I just love the smiles. I just love giving people an opportunity for them to feel better. And so I'd say that's another benefit is whenever they're able to give back as a pet therapy team, for instance, if they go that route, is to be able to see people's smiles, to be able to enter a room where there were a lot of tears and all of a sudden there's laughter, or there was a lot of tension, and now all of a sudden now they're seeing that transformation. I'd say that's one of the biggest benefits that I have seen in individuals that either are on the receiving end or they have been on the receiving end, but also now they happen to be individuals that are giving back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if someone is listening who I know you talked a little bit about like the requirements for especially for a dog for pet therapy, but maybe someone's listening who wants to get a dog and have their dog become a pet therapy dog. I guess, do you have any tips or advice that they should know about?
Well, lots. So number one is be realistic as far as I mentioned, whether or not you as a handler have the bandwidth to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because different programs have different requirements. Like for instance, us, we require X amount of hours every year so that we don't just have a volunteer saying, oh, I'm part of the pet therapy, but you never show up. You never respond to any request. And so we don't want those passive volunteers. So number one to consider is, do I have the bandwidth as a handler? Two, is my dog good enough to be properly trained? Because you have to take them to classes and to be able to do that. Third is then asking yourselves, okay, is there a cause, meaning burn survivors, cancer survivors, anything, education, children, veterans? Is there a population that seems to essentially pull at your heart more than others? Because that also narrows it down for you as a potential, let's say, pet therapy team, which organizations you need to contact. Because also, if you want to work with military, there might be specific training needed for you as a team to work with them, as opposed to just rounding, let's say, in a library, for instance.
Yep.
And so once you answer those questions, then of course, then it becomes easier to look at the criteria or the requirements with this population in this industry, with me having the bandwidth to do A, B, and C, and for my dog to be good. Then you're in a better position to make the best decisions.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Tello, I know we are coming up on our time, and we do have two final questions for you. But before we dive into those, do you have anything else, pet therapy or not, that you want to share with our listeners today?
No, I think I've shared a lot. The only thing left, for me to share is that as individuals journey through their own recovery, is pet therapy or just dogs in general can be an amazing tool, but an amazing companion for them to really strengthen that journey. Even in the individuals that say, well, I have a good support system, have good parents, significant other, peer support, etc. It might be something worth considering. That unless you experience it, you don't know probably what you're missing.
Definitely. Yeah, and before I do ask you our two final questions, I can't believe I haven't mentioned this yet, but you did recently write an article all on pet therapy that we featured in Journey magazine, and it's now available on our website. So for those who want to learn more, we'll have that linked in our show notes below. So be sure to check that out and reach out to us if you do have any follow-up questions or want to learn more.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, with that said, like I said, we do always ask our guests two quick final questions. I changed Amber's question around a little bit since she wasn't here to ask, but we talked a lot about self-care. So I would love to know, how do you practice self-care, Dr. Tello?
So one word, and that is systems. And what I mean by that is self-care cannot just be once in a while or whenever I need it. It really, there's a book titled Atomic Habits, a really famous book by James Clear, that I love. A tagline in the book, and that is, anything and everything falls or rises on people's systems. systems, think of it as your habits. That's another word of saying that. And so my habits, they begin from the moment that I wake up and how I wake up, the alarm, the type of alarm that I use, what type of workout that I'm doing, my devotional. I lean a lot on my faith, so my devotional is important. To then when I get into the house, how I greet my wife, because by then she's awake already. Then my children, how I greet them. I take cold showers because I just worked out, and then did my devotional. But that's another way in which, especially for my muscles, to be able to begin to heal. And then my self-care then is I eat oatmeal every single day because of not a lot of calories, etc. So my nutrition is extremely important. Um, and so then I play with my youngest daughter, is almost 3 years old, for some time, because that's the last thing that I want to think about as I leave to work. Then on my way to work, I listen to a podcast 5 minutes before I get to work. My wife sends me an audio prayer. So 5 minutes before I get to work, I listen to that because it's the last thing that I want to hear before I get into work mode is my wife praying over me through audio. When I'm parking, I say a surrender prayer that at that moment, I'm just saying, I'm just going to show up like this podcast. I'm not even sure what to expect, but I'm going to be obedient, and the outcome is not up to me. So I'm going to show up. And then throughout the day, I drink a lot of water. I go for walks. And that's a habit that I have on my calendar. Protected time when I'm going to go for a walk, when I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And then on my way back to work, well, back from work home, I have what I call a ritual that helps me transition from work to home. Very specific. That is all about gratitude. And so once I get home, then we play hide and seek with my youngest daughter. Do that. So I'm sharing this with you because that is my habit. That is my system. That's what gives me the ability to do what I do, the capacity that I'm doing it, and make it sustainable. Because that's another tagline from the book is people should not rely on motivation or just wait for the right thing to do. It's more about the discipline, because it makes it easier. So self-care, what I'll say even in that question, cannot just be something that you do once in a while. It really needs to be a system and a habit, because some days, even the things that I mentioned to you may not be good enough, because maybe something's heavy on my heart, or there's a lot of things in my head. So then I rely on something else. So I always have a menu.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love a good routine, and sounds like you have a great routine figured out. I'm the same way. I have my morning routine that I do every day, and that just like grounds me for the rest of the day. And like you said, I'm not always motivated to go do it, but you have to have the discipline to go do it, because your later self will thank you for doing it earlier.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, with that said, it is time for our final question, which is our Phoenix Partner question today, sponsored by Telgian. So their question is, what is one thing you hope someone listening today learns?
So many things. I'll give you my favorite quote, and that is that nothing is ever wasted. Regardless of the season that anybody listening might find themselves in, whether they look into pet therapy, whether they engage in peer support, or any other things that I mentioned or that you mentioned, would be helpful to them. The one thing that I hope that they are walking away with is to recognize that nothing is ever wasted. And so sometimes it sounds cliche, and I know if we're dealing with something at that moment, it seems like, oh, nothing's ever wasted. But we ask the why is this happening to me? At the same time, when we have that mindset of nothing's ever wasted, then we go from why is this happening to what's it for? What can I do now? And so, so I'll say that will be my answer, that nothing is ever wasted.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Tello, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. I've learned so much, and I really appreciate all of your time and expertise and sharing with our listeners.
Thank you, Rachel. There's been a pleasure. I wasn't sure what to expect. You know, you and I touched bases before this, but this has been quite a pleasure. So thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Girls with Grafts. If you are enjoying this content, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.